everyone, back to Foot Pain Explained. I'm Talysha from the Progressive Podiatry Project, and today I'm again joined by Kirsty, the Lifting Pod, and Aaron from Aaron Wilson Rehab. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. And how are we feeling after our last episode? Did you get much sort of feedback or insights coming in from that?
Yeah, good. I had a few people actually reach out and say that they found what we were talking about pretty interesting. So that's nice to know that people actually listen, for one. And secondly, it was good to have, I suppose, the whole myth around bunions, because I've actually had a few people message me about that, and I was just like, sent them the link, and I was like, just listen to this, and then if you have any questions, I'll answer them after. And that was really good. So yeah, that was sweet. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, nice. What about you, Aaron?
Yeah, pretty much the same. And like, it was just good to, air some of the grievances that we experience online, seeing a lot of misinformation and stuff like that. So yeah, it was quite good, and didn't think too many people would be as interested as feet as it turned out, but they're there.
Yeah, it's quite surprising. And like, even with the Progressive Podiatry Project Instagram account, like I've had quite a few messages coming through from that. It's quite interesting that you get audiences from all over the world, and they're like heaps of people message that were like, oh, I've had plantar heel pain for years and I tried to switch to minimalist shoes and it made it worse. And so a lot of what we were talking about, it's like we've become aware that there's these problems that our patients experience because we're seeing them sort of face to face in the clinic, but then you kind of forget that there's this whole other world out there, and there's probably a lot more people than we think that are experiencing these same problems. So it was actually, like you guys were saying, it was quite good getting a lot of the feedback and the conversations, and it's nice to know that at least some of what we're talking about is somewhat relevant to and useful. And so what we're going to be covering today is kind of a shoot off from the last episode. So in the last episode, we had a little bit of a breakdown of pronation, what it is, what it isn't, what do we do about it, a little bit of BS involved in it. And then we did also tackle footwear, and footwear specifically in relation to bunions. And then we did tackle a little bit of BS that came from a certain Instagram account that has no idea about feet, but they have a pretty strong foot fetish. And I think stemming off from that, a lot of the conversations it seems we've all had, it kind of came into sort of the minimalist and maximalist debate. And one particular theme that I had with a lot of the people I was talking to after the last episode was people trying to transition into minimalist shoes to help treat plantar fasciopathy. So basically what we're going to be talking about today is like footwear is an immensely large topic, like it's huge, but we're going to hone in a little bit more specific based on some of the feedback that we've got from, again, last episode. And it's footwear and sort of the minimalist versus maximalist debate, and how shoes can or cannot be used for injuries, or managing injuries or preventing injuries. And then Kirsty's dug up some interesting papers as far as footwear prescription for, say, running economy. So first up, I think that'll probably be a good part to tackle. So Kirsty, with that paper that I just was referring to, do you just want to give us a little bit of a rundown of your thoughts regarding that?
Yeah, in relation to the article T was talking about, it's by the 6-week transition to minimalistic shoes, and it looks at the improving running economy and time trial performance. So in regards to what the study is trying to achieve, it investigated, I suppose, the gradual transition over 6 weeks of runners from these minimalistic shoes to from maximalistic shoes to minimalistic shoes, and it looks at stride rate, stride length. What else they look at? They looked at footfall pattern, I think, and then other like ankle range of motion and strength and things like that. There were a few things that I did actually find quite interesting in the actual model itself. One of the main benefits that they looked at from minimalistic shoes is that they were very lightweight. So obviously that's a big obvious one there is that they don't have much to them. But that actually was a key feature in terms of the improved speed over that transition. So we're looking at, I suppose, someone, for example, running a 5K, their time trial was improved and therefore their running performance was improved from the transition of a minimalistic shoe. And then there's also a direct correlation between, I think, the shoe weight and the metabolic demand of the participants. So, for example, for every, I think it was increased in like 100 grams in shoe weight, the metabolic demand increased by 1%. So therefore they found that even though, from the maximalist shoe to the minimalist shoe, they were definitely improving. However, there was also improved economy when they were looking at the maximalist shoes as well, because the fact that they were so highly cushioned, these also decreased muscle activity. So therefore they did benefit as well, the ones that were in more maximalist shoes, because they had a quicker recovery post-run. And hence, I suppose the conclusion was pretty much saying it's worth to just find a balance between, cushion and weight. And that's all breaks down, I suppose, to the individual. So when last episode, when we were talking about, I suppose, the genetic makeup and physiology of the individual, that was like a big key thing in this article, because it didn't obviously just look at how the runner performed in terms of their gait and things like that, but it looked at the ground reaction forces, the reduced injury risk. So I suppose due to the decrease in like that vertical impact. So from a stack height shoe, of your classic 10 mil like stack height versus your minimalist, which is like pretty much, neutral, zero gradient there. Then that stack height, usually about 10 to 15 millimeters, did actually benefit some runners, because it reduced the injury of like the posterior chain, so calf tightness, Achilles injuries and things like that. But the one thing I found really interesting about this article, and it's also, I think, linked to another one of his that he did in 2015. So I think it might be this one or it might be another one, but he found that body weight had a big factor to do with injuries, which I found really interesting. Like in terms of, if you have a high body weight in a client wearing minimalist shoes, there's a greater risk of injury, versus someone with a lower body weight, they had a greater risk of getting an injury in a cushioned shoe, because there was too much cushion in the shoe, and therefore they're unable to compress the material to adapt to the shoe, if that makes sense. So like either way, it was like you find a shoe that fits, and as we were sort of hashing on in to start with before we started the episode, as Aaron was saying, like, comfort is key. And that's one of the paradigms as well that we sort of talk about when we talk about running shoes, is that comfort is usually what you go for. Like I know I always say to my patients is like, go and try on, these couple of shoes and whatnot. Don't be too specific on style. You don't give them an ASICS GT 2000 D width this size, and say, this is the only shoe that's for you, because it's not true. You go in and give them an opportunity to try on a few different brands, a few different types and styles. And at the end of the day, they're the ones wearing the shoes. So they will tell you if they find them comfortable or not. And I found that pretty cool. So just sort of, I suppose, rehashing on that article is just that slow transition. And what they did is they actually, over the transition period, people who haven't read it, is just they increased their load by 5% each week. So that's how they looked at that slow transition over 6 weeks and seeing how they respond to it. There's another study that I'll quickly mention that quickly correlates to this one really nicely, by Gresta, I think in 2018 or something, quite recent actually. And they found that time lost to injury was less in those who wore maximalist shoes. So, but only due to the fact of like the mileage that the runners were undertaking. So for example, for you and I, maybe for Aaron and I, probably not so much T, because she's more of a runner than us. Like we wouldn't benefit as much from a maximalist shoe than I suppose T would, because of the volume. So maximalist shoes offer that variable of increased volume, and therefore those who undertake that higher mileage would benefit more from these types of shoes, because they're compressing them and they're doing the mileage on the shoe. And that was the only variables of, like, I suppose the benefit of that maximalist shoe is that you have a less time lost to injury, I suppose. But yeah, to sort of wrap it up, there was, I suppose, in relation to what we were talking about before with plantar fasciitis and plantar fasciopathy, and people saying that, you know, sometimes their plantar fasciitis is worse when they go into a minimalistic shoe versus a maximalist shoe. It really depends on, I suppose, a lot more than just the shoe. And that's where I'd say people, you know, are going in a different direction when it comes to shoe prescription, because for me, a shoe is like a treatment in itself sometimes. Like,
100%.
You don't want to like be like, oh yeah, this is 100% the right shoe for you. It's kind of like saying, yeah, this surgery is going to fix you. It's like, oh, I don't know, there's a lot of other things we've got to take into consideration. So just having a look at what the goal of the shoe is, like if you are looking like or the activity. So if you are, we're obviously talking about here runners, and this is just evidence in a running trial. So if it'll be different for anything else we look at, but for evidence, they don't really have too much on footwear. This is the best we could do. But the goal of a maximalist shoe is, for my knowledge, is to accommodate or reduce vertical impact load. And then for a goal of a minimalist shoe is to maintain that individual structure of a foot position and promote that natural kinetic chain or distribution of force around the lower limb. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and what pathology you're trying to treat as well. And there was also one more thing just where I want to jump off in relation to, I suppose, like injury. One last article I read, I can't remember who it was by now, but I will link it so you can pop it below. In relation to plantar fasciopathy, plantar fasciitis, or anything plantar heel pain, it's obviously looking at that, what we were talking about before, that rear foot positioning. So as one of the key indicators of when people prescribe, so they always look at that post of a shoe. They found that I think the overall injury risk in this article was lower in participants who had those motion controlled shoes for the treatment of plantar fasciitis. But then again, this only was in participants who had that more of a internally rotated foot structure. So it comes back to what you were saying before, really analysing the patient, looking at the causations and the genetic makeup versus, oh yeah, you've got plantar fasciitis, you need to go into a motion control shoe, because that may not necessarily be the case. But yeah, that was pretty much the article. Hope that made a bit of sense.
Yeah, it did make sense. And one thing I did want to, so I've read that article as well. So the one I'm referring to is the 6-week transition to minimalist shoes. One thing that I think is quite important for people to realize is, so when in this study, when they were looking at the improvement of running economy for these people, the people that were in this study, they were already quite experienced runners. So they were already running a minimum of 15 Ks a week, and their time trial performance, they were already running at sort of 13 to 15 kilometers an hour. So we're looking at, what's that, sort of 4 minutes per K pace.
You're the runner here, so
COVID brain fart. But so with that, that's one thing to consider. So these people would have already had a baseline level of musculoskeletal integrity and cardiovascular fitness. And then so further sort of throwing minimalist shoes into the mix, that just offers probably another avenue for that improved neuromuscular coordination and just that sort of refinement of their running form. So it would be, if you were someone that was new to running and you're thinking that I want to get from 6-minute pace to 5-minute 45 pace, and you haven't got many kilometers under the belt or miles under your feet, then probably switching to minimalist shoes to try and make you a little bit faster is probably asking for trouble. So the context of who this applies to is probably quite important. And like we were just saying, what Kirsty said is it's all about sort of prescribing for the individual. And then a pretty good segue from this is Aaron shared an amazing meme the other day on his Instagram page, the Forrest Gump one. So if you haven't seen it, go and check out his Instagram page, Aaron Wilson Rehab. It's hilarious. But it's basically taking a little bit of the piss out of those that are completely absolutist when it comes to wide toe box and or minimalist shoes. So in relation to injuries, Aaron, I'll throw this one to you. Do you find that it's probably a little bit of it is an absolutist view when people go, okay, to reduce injuries, go into a minimalist shoe? And what do you feel some of the problems are with that approach?
Yeah, so I think it goes both ways. So, I mean, I like to take fun at the minimalist crowd at times. I say that, well, my work shoes are Viva barefoot shoes. So don't worry, I'm attacking maximalist shoes soon.
I've got a pair of Vibrams, so don't worry.
Yeah, like my thing has always been as a practitioner, and even when I was coming through as a student, I hate the concept of absolutes in that it's do this or you will have this. Because one of the first things we learn is about patient-centered care, and I'm like, well, what about them? And footwear is such a cultural thing, you know. Every female that comes in to my clinic with foot pain, if I mention the word footwear, they get so defensive, and it's, I swear I don't wear heels, I swear I don't wear this, I'm usually in good shoes. And it's not just the females, it's the males too. And we all have that social connection that like, and this thought that, oh, well, this must be good or this must be bad. But we don't care. Like as people, we don't care, because how many times has someone said, oh, you shouldn't wear that shoe, or heels are bad for you? And I don't think that's stopping anyone. And so my thing is always about, well, okay, like that's how we're going to be. Like, what can we then do to promote everything around that? And the best thing I think for that is the more research has come out that footwear, they're just shoes. And that's a lot of where I take a lot of my opinions when it comes to footwear. You know, if you like minimalist footwear, great. If you like maximalist footwear, great. You know, me clinically, I tell my patients, find the one that looks cool and the one that makes you run faster, because we all want to look cool and we all want to run fast. Because yeah, like even the Cochrane review came out like only 3 or 4 months ago and found with high certainty that with all the evidence we have, shoes don't make a difference to whether you're going to get an injury or not. So if we had 100 people all the exact same, they did the exact same thing, 50 had one shoe, 50 had the opposite shoe, the same amount of injuries are going to occur. So if they're in different shoes but they're still getting injured the same, you know, realistically we should be then going, okay, well, it's not the shoes that cause an injury. What that is, you know, we can never really say. Injuries are so unpredictable, but we can almost say with good certainty it probably wasn't the shoe, because unless it's your first day in a shoe and you did something ridiculous, you've probably worn that shoe for, you know, a good period of time. You've probably trained a good period of time and walked and so on. When it comes to certain injuries, of course, you know, certain footwear are going to have benefits versus other people. And that's just going to be simply just whether it be a material in the shoe, positioning of the shoe, something like that that's going to offload a crankier tissue, you know, an injured tissue or something like that. And yeah, that's basically my whole thoughts on it, is just pick a shoe you like and then figure everything else out. Because I don't think anyone, even when I was as a student on placement too, and they'd always tell them everyone had to get these Axis Kayanos and we had to have these Brooks Dyad. And I was always like, well, I'm not an athlete's foot salesman. I can't remember all these different shoes. But most people would come back the next session, oh, did you get the shoes? Oh, no, I didn't like them. So why not, you know, for me, it's like, well, let them get the shoes they like and let's see what we can do around that.
Yep, that's a really good approach. And I agree. So I'll just read out the results. So it's a Cochrane review that I will be having a chat with Ian Griffiths soon about this. So the Cochrane review is running shoes for preventing lower limb running injuries in adults. And yeah, like Aaron said, it was only a couple of months ago. Now, I'll just read out the author's conclusions because it sums up this massive review, which I love, but I'll just read it out. so people can understand. Most evidence demonstrates no reduction in lower limb running injuries in adults when comparing different types of running shoes. Overall, the certainty of the evidence determining whether different types of running shoes influence running injury rates was very low to low, so the quality is just not there. And as such, we are uncertain as to the true effects of different types of running shoes upon injury rates. And like what Aaron just referred to, so the incidence of injuries, it's pretty well across the board. It stays the same. It's just what gets injured in different types of shoes. It does change. And so if someone's in a more lower profile minimalist type shoe, forefoot injuries like metatarsal stress fractures and stress responses through the forefoot, and also Achilles tendon pathologies, and in some instances plantar fascia pathologies, their incidence can increase. But then if you go into a more maximalist shoe, or if you've got one with a carbon plate and a stiff forefoot rocker, or a combination of the two, then that tends to shift load a bit more proximal. So we're looking at like sacral stress fractures, which after was it the Alpha Fly? Oh, the Next Percent. Once that came in, the incidence at this sports and arthritis clinic where I was working, sacral stress fractures were very, very rare. And then Michael Nitschke, who I was working with, like within that sort of 12-month period when these the super shoes were coming out, there was about a dozen or so sacral stress injuries that came about in that 12-month period, where you may have only seen one every couple of years. So it doesn't remove load, it just shifts load. Now, one thing that the conversations that I've had, like I was saying from the back of the last episode, was specifically in relation to plantar fasciopathy. So with a certain Instagram page, they do love barefoot shoes and telling everyone that they should get into barefoot shoes, and that any type of shoe outside of that is going to cause plantar fasciopathy for I guess when you have 2 million followers, the laws of physiology don't apply. So you can just make up whatever shit you want and that'll be the cause of it. Anyway, so a lot of the narrative that comes about is going into minimalist shoes will fix your plantar fasciitis or plantar fasciopathy. Now, for some people, transitioning into minimalist shoes will actually trigger it and make it worse. But for other people, it can actually help. Now, before I dive too much into the physiology of that, because I do love a little bit of a physiology chat, do either of you two, we'll start with Kirsty first and then bounce to Aaron. So do either of you use footwear specifically in relation to managing plantar fasciopathy? So have you ever gotten someone into a more minimalist shoe to help manage plantar fascia?
Yeah, I have. I'll definitely say I have, purely because of, it's hard because plantar fasciitis is such a broad term, right? Like in terms of where the actual pain is and where I suppose the structure itself is inflamed. Well, not necessarily inflamed, it could be compressed or whatever it may be. I choose it depending on where, I suppose, and what I'm trying to achieve for them, like of what we've actually, I don't like to use the term diagnose, but I'll just say diagnose for the sake of this chat. Like to say if we've diagnosed them with plantar enthesopathy or, at the actual insertion versus, through the actual central aponeursis of the fascia. So, more the mid portion. I don't know, I found that there's different loads and also based on the foot type of the patient. And to be honest, the big factor is not even to do with the anatomy. It's actually to do with what they do for work. So I've chosen my shoes because, say, for example, very common one I get on their feet all day, work in a warehouse, steel cap boots and things like that, where they're on concrete. And then it's just that more of a compressive type nature. And so with that, I would say sometimes a minimalist shoe, is one, not health and safety wise, they wouldn't be able to wear it. But it probably wouldn't even benefit them anyway because it might actually aggravate it and make it worse just due to that compressive nature of the fascia versus, I suppose, a maximalist shoe, which is mostly steel cap boots. I haven't really seen too many steel caps that I could roll up in my hand. Maybe soon, but I don't know. So that is what I would call more of a maximalist shoe, is a steel cap that has a little bit more support there that can offer a little bit of like, or can assist in offloading that compression to an extent. So therefore I would, if they're in one steel cap that, is not comfortable for them and they hate them, but they have to wear them, then I would assist them in finding a steel cap that helps, if that makes sense. And that's where my footwear prescription would come in. So yeah, that's just like one demographic of patients that I'd see for plantar fasciitis or where I'd change their footwear. Yeah.
And what about you, Aaron?
Yeah, so as I already said, I found clinically a bit of a struggle when it comes to convincing people of different footwear, even in general, not even like talking about minimalist. I haven't particularly for plantar fasciitis, but I have had a few with more Achilles tendinopathies. Ironically, I've actually opted for them to have more of a Skechers or a Nike free runner because it gives them a bit more cushion that they're not experiencing that tensile load at the Achilles when they're walking, running. It does, like you said, shift more proximally. And a lot of them I found when they're very, especially more our insertional Achilles, where they're more sensitive to compression against the Achilles, not having a heel cup and just having a nice little, that sock line of those give, have been quite good for those type of people. I'm sure once this airs, I'll be flamed in the world of podiatry for saying I suggested a Skechers, but yeah.
No, I've prescribed Converse before, so the old Chuck Taylors. It all comes back to well, if you take the client into consideration, you can make a prescription.
That's it.
They need, that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's so both of what you said, and especially Kirsty, that very much highlights a lot of the conversations I've been having. And that's where, so some of the conversations that came off Instagram after last episode was people saying, oh, I've been told, well, they weren't told directly, they just listened to a couple of reels on Instagram and that's what they base their footwear decisions on. I've got heel pain, I need to transition into minimalist shoes. Oh my God, it's made it worse. And that's where, like Kirsty, you were saying, that because there's essentially, they can overlap, but we've got compression related factors that will contribute to plantar heel pain, and we've got tensile related factors. And then we've got the BMI of the individual, the gender, the activity levels, everything like that. So when you've got all of those elements coming into play, that will influence the type of shoe that we may or may not recommend. And it's very much like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So there might be other factors at play, but if you have someone who you take their clinical history into account, so doesn't matter if they're overweight or not, but they're spending long periods of time standing on hard surfaces day after day after day. You look at their shoe, it's a relatively low profile, flexible shoe, not a lot of cushioning. We may want to add some cushioning, go more maxi, to alleviate some of the compressive loads that are being exerted on the plantar heel. But then if you've got someone else who it may look like it's a more tensile related injury and we actually want to load the Achilles, not the Achilles, but that can happen as well, the plantar fascia, going into a minimalist shoe can actually be a therapeutic intervention. So there's one study I do want to talk about, and they did refer to it. So it was reviewed in the Cochrane Review, but this paper out of the US from Michael Ryan. So what it was, and there's two really good contrasts that I want to throw in here, and it'll give you a little bit of an insight on what we may be able to do clinically when it comes to exercise adherence. So this paper is examining the degree of pain reduction using a multi-element exercise model with a conventional training shoe versus an ultra-flexible training shoe for treating plantar fasciitis. So the ultra-flexible training shoe was a Nike Free 5.0. Now, their whole premise, and it's built somewhat off the Michael Rathleff paper, which is the high load strength training for the management of plantar fasciopathy, which that is built off the principles of eccentric loading for treating Achilles tendinopathy. So we're just going to do a bit of a physiology dump. So the Achilles tendon, very similar to the plantar fascia, highly concentrated in type 1 collagen, which the purpose of that is to absorb and release elastic strain energy. So it needs to be able to tolerate high degrees of tensile loads. So in the presence of Achilles tendinopathy and or plantar fasciopathy, we see histopathological changes happening. So there'll be some fibrillar disruption and influx of proteoglycans. So we essentially lose a lot of the integrity of the plantar fascia and or Achilles tendon to store and release elastic strain energy. So it becomes a bit less stiff, a bit more compliant. Now, high load eccentrics are very good at stimulating type 1 collagen remodeling, which actually helps repair that fibrillar pattern in some instances. In some instances, it doesn't repair it, but a lot of the time it can. So with these high load eccentrics, that applies the tensile load, which helps stimulate the collagen, which helps heal and repair the tissue, which can improve function. Now, Michael Rathleff's paper, they took this information and then applied it to the plantar fascia. So this is where they were performing calf raises with the digits extended. So they have the coupling of the loading of the Achilles because they're doing a calf raise, but because the digits are extended, it's actually engaging the windlass mechanism and we're getting some tensile load more directly on the plantar fascia. And so what they found with that study is comparing the high load strength training for plantar fasciopathy versus stretching alone, especially at the 3-month mark, there was a greater improvement in pain reductions and the scores on the foot function index compared to those that were just doing the stretching exercises. So, but then after 12 months, there wasn't too much of a difference between the two. So it just looks like those that were performing the higher load exercises improved a bit quicker. Now, flicking back to this footwear study, they actually had really similar results. So the conventional training shoe were people just in their own joggers, and they reviewed all the people that had these shoes, and they were mostly stable, neutral, or potentially going into the supportive category. So their shoes didn't change, and they were given some balance exercises and some plantar fascia stretching exercises. There wasn't the high load strengthening. So group 1 with the conventional training shoe was given that shoe. Group 2, who had the Nike Freeze, at the, I think it was the 3-month mark, they actually, similar to the Rathleff paper, they actually had an improvement more so initially at that 3-month mark on pain and function. But then towards the end of the study, there wasn't too much of a difference between the two. Now, the whole premise of this paper and what the researchers were doing were introducing the minimalist shoes to introduce tensile loading to the plantar fascia to stimulate that collagen remodeling. So this, like, there's sort of 2 things that we can take clinically out of this is sometimes it doesn't have to be a specific exercise that we give someone. Sometimes we can use movement plus a footwear prescription or recommendation. So if you've got someone who's got plantar fasciopathy and we are looking to increase or improve the tensile loading tolerance of the plantar fascia, for some people, they may not want to change their shoes, but they might be more keen to adhere to an exercise program. That might be fine. But then if you have someone that just goes, I will never do these exercises, I'll keep forgetting to do them, an option for them is potentially going into a more minimalist type of shoe because you're going to get that tensile loading happening, which can help with the repair. But there's just one caveat to this. In the paper, we had, for the most part, the people that were in the minimalist shoes did have that improvement in pain at 3 months. However, there were 2 people that had a significant increase in symptoms. So for those people, having that additional tensile load being introduced because of the shoes actually made them worse. So for those people, maybe going into minimalist shoes, not so great. And then maybe sticking to a more conventional shoe plus some rehab exercises might be the way to go for them. So it was quite interesting because this that paper, when we're talking about the group that did the ultra flexible training shoes, so the Nike Free group, I think there was only 12 people in that group. And so 2 out of those 12 had a significant increase in pain, but then the other 10, 1 person dropped out. So 9 people had improvements, 2 people got really worse, a lot worse, that was bad English, and 1 person just dropped out of the study. So it's, again, how we would take this and interpret this is for some people, a minimalist shoe, if they've got tensile related plantar fasciopathy, it may be beneficial to increase the load to help them adapt, to help them improve their function, decrease their pain scores. But for some people, it could make it significantly worse. Now, I just have either of you come across this paper? Because I love this one because it really highlights a lot of things.
I've got it up now on my other monitor, but no, first time I've actually been aware of this one.
Yeah, same, first time. So I'd be interested to give it a read.
Yeah, well, I gave you the TLDR, so
Yeah.
but yeah, this is I just really wanted to draw on this paper because it highlighted very much how, yeah, for some people transitioning into a minimalist shoe might be quite beneficial, but then for other people it can make it a lot worse. And that's why it's always very important for clinicians, I feel, to address the person sitting in front of us, because again, if we're just very absolutist in our footwear choices, our recommendations, everything like that, that's where it's okay. It might work for 80% of people, but then we might have 20% of people where it's an adverse event. But then if you do just operate out of a gray area where you go, okay, this might work for that person, this might work for that person, that's how you actually get better results and hopefully less adverse outcomes. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
and
I
like
think
I was going to say, yeah, definitely agreeing.
And so that basically wraps up a little bit of what we wanted to cover today as far as, yeah, some of the different literature that's out there. And we will probably talk about footwear time and time and time again, because there are so many nuances to this and clinical applications and everything like that. But today, what we really wanted to highlight is that in some instances you can use footwear for, say, performance metric improvement, like Kirsty was talking about with running economy. And then we can actually use footwear for injury management, not so much injury prevention. But again, it very much comes down to the individuals. So I'll throw to Aaron first up. So we're going to go with some clinical takeaways. So I think, like what we did last episode, where if we had one takeaway for, just say, the general population, if they were listening, and then a takeaway for a clinician if they were listening. So what would your two be, Aaron?
Yeah, so it kind of works for both ends. I guess the takeaway for both people and clinicians as well. Like, think that a good way to think of it is as a scale. On one end, you've got high performance, where every like little detail matters. You know, something like a tenth of a second for Usain Bolt's the difference between him making and breaking a record. And then on the other side of the scale, you've got people, you know, with specific pathologies. So, you know, if I did have a ruptured tendon or muscle strain, something like that, a certain shoe is going to probably offload a structure better. And it's a good balance, because then for the 99% of everyone else, it doesn't matter. And it's probably just a bit being too pedantic. I actually had an interesting person in clinic today come in and told me about, you know, their pronatory shoes and how they made them worse and what should they do. And it's a good way to think, because we're traditionally told if you're flatter, you have a pronation / motion control shoe. If you're more higher arch foot, you get a stability shoe. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you get a neutral shoe. And whilst the traditional reason in that, in my opinion, is the biggest load of crap, it's still, at least for most people, a good framework for a different reason. So we know if you've got a more flatter foot, you're probably going to wear the inside of your shoe out. So these, quote, motion control shoes that don't control your motion or prevent injury may last you longer because they've got more material along the inside. And opposite way with the stability shoe. If you're someone who wears the outside of your shoe more, that stability shoe has a lot more material on the outside. So you might get longer last out of them. But ultimately, it means shit all if you don't like the feel of the shoe. So clinically, and for Gen Pop, if you don't like the look of it, it doesn't feel good, it's not a good shoe. Unless in the absolute case of, unfortunately, you're someone dealing with ulcers and it's a wound management shoe. Unfortunately, you have to suck up then. Your shoe looks like garbage, but it's the best thing for you. Outside of that population, footwear's footwear. Whether you like minimalist or not, footwear or footwear, you put them on your feet generally to protect your feet against, you know, things like glass, bindies, and hot tar. You know, other than that, just get what you like.
Yep.
Yeah, I like your approach of get what you like, because I think that's so important. And I think people don't highlight that enough. You should be feeling confident coming out of that, I guess, store or maybe that consult room after having a chat to a clinician, because, as you said, you don't want to go into something that makes you feel like you've got something wrong with you, or, something that highlights your ailments, like these weird shoes that people, oh, why are you wearing them? And then you've got to go on a tangent about how you've got this pain. But I suppose my takeaway would be, I'll probably start the opposite. I'll start with maybe clinicians for me, because I know I've had one this week where I had a new patient who said, oh, the podiatrist I recently saw, and this is not to downgrade podiatrists prescribing shoes, it's just purely one case scenario, but they literally told her she could only wear this one type of shoe. And to me, I was like, I'm just going to be straight with you and say that it's a lie, because there's so many shoes out there. And for me, I would say, let's stop the, I guess, not necessarily lie, but maybe a little bit of dishonesty with like giving certain shoes certain attributes. So for instance, like we said, Asics Kayano, or like your Ghost in your Brooks and things like that. Like maybe we just need to educate more on what the shoe is for, like rather than, or actually we need to ask questions in that clinical history prior to that shoe prescription. Like don't have that preconceived idea of like, oh, they've got pain, they need to go into this motion control shoe that's going to really help them, because you haven't even asked them like, why are we putting them into a runner when they don't even run, or like what are we doing? Like, so I guess try and get to know your patient prior, and rather than giving attributes and brands and whatnot, more education around what they're trying to look for in a shoe and what they need, and learn about the factors rather than those specific styles. So that's my main one. But for people, general public, I suppose the best recommendation based upon the evidence we've spoken about / we have available, try and get a shoe that's going to cause like the least amount of change or harm if you haven't got an injury, like, or if you haven't, if your ailments are ailment free, but and try to get something maybe that's lightweight, comfortable. As we say, comfort is key, and maybe something that's not so structured that's going to change the way you walk. But the general population that may have ailments or injuries, obviously go get advice from a professional, help get a treatment plan, and maybe in your treatment plan they may prescribe you a certain type of shoe for your condition, not because your foot matches that shoe or whatever it might be. It just might be for that treatment plan. And then once your treatment is over, you might not need those type of shoes anymore. So, and versus, I suppose, a money point of view, do your research. Don't go spending like, $250, $300 on shoes and thinking that's going to fix you, because just because you buy an expensive shoe doesn't mean it's the right one for you, unfortunately. So yeah, that'd be my take home.
Yep, very good. And sorry if I get a little bit verbose with my take home. So I think like when it comes, so I'll throw my take home first off for the general public. So I think the sort of short and sweet version is there's no right or wrong shoe for you. So if you've got someone on the internet saying, oh, you should go minimalist, or you should go maximalist, or you should go supportive, or you should go whatever, ignore them. Go with what's comfortable. And this is where, like, you see some people cop a lot of flack for if you've got sort of someone who's like in their 40s and they've bought a pair of Vaporflies and they're using the Vaporflies for a 5K park run. Like, there's no harm in that. Like, if you're enjoying it, like, we're probably the fattest we've ever been. So anything that encourages people to positively engage in physical activity is a good thing. We don't need to put this pressure on and stress on that, oh, you should be doing this in a neutral trainer, or you should be doing it in this, that, and the other. If you can wear a pair of shoes, it's allowing you to enjoy your activities and it's not causing you any problems, that's all you need to worry about. So if you feel like doing a park run in a pair of Vaporflies and you're only going to run 5Ks a week for the rest of your life, go for it. Doesn't matter. But when there is a problem, then that's when sometimes we can look to use footwear as a treatment tool. So it doesn't mean that everyone that's got a musculoskeletal pathology needs to change their footwear. It's just a potential avenue for us to do that. So everyone that's got shin pain or plantar heel pain or Achilles tendinopathy, they don't always need to change their shoes, because there's usually bigger fish to fry in that scenario. Load management issues, how much they're moving, how much they're not moving, things like that. But then once we get to a point that we may need to modify load, or if we have someone like in the example I was talking about earlier, we want to add load to a structure, but they don't want to do specific exercises, that's where we can use shoes. So the takeaway for the general public is, if it's not causing any problems, then it's probably not a problem. So don't feel like you need to change your shoes based on the arbitrary advice of anyone. And then for practitioners, we get, I think, a little bit too scripted. And as much as the evidence has evolved, and it's pretty clear that we can't use supportive shoes to prevent injuries, we need to beat this out of us, because it's still very much like, you just need to look on social media for how many sort of videos and reels are coming out with clinicians, like what to look for in a good shoe, like make sure it's really supportive, you can't rotate it. For some people, my English is terrible today, for some people that may aggravate a problem, for other people it may be fine. But again, not using this sort of single arbitrary explanation of what makes a good shoe, matching certain shoe specifics to the person and what they're looking to achieve is kind of, if we're making footwear recommendations, that's probably where we need to go. So for example, taking into account the elements of a shoe and the elements of someone's presentation. So if someone's got diffuse anterior knee pain, you review their shoes and they're in a 10 mil offset, maybe getting them into a shoe that's got a lower offset may help alleviate some of that anterior knee pain. Conversely, if someone's got Achilles tendinopathy, and they're in a ultra, so 0 heel drop, maybe going into something that's got an 8 mil heel drop, or just throwing a heel raise in it, may be where they need to go. So I think the take home for clinicians is probably, if we can, try and move away from the supportive shoes are king, and probably take a little bit more time and consideration with what are we actually looking to achieve when it comes to making a recommendation for footwear. So we can unpack this for hours and hours and hours, so we'll just save it for a few more episodes. So I think that will wrap it up. Really good take homes, guys. I've enjoyed it again, as always. So thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Kirsty. And we'll catch you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
No worries. Do I have enough time to quickly plug a discount code?
Go for it.
Yeah, so if you want more of those wide shoe, barefoot shoes, and they even sell some Nikes as well, Soul Mechanics, especially down in Melbourne, they've got the store, but they sell online, AW Rehab, and you'll get 15% off any purchase.
Awesome. Might hit that up. All right. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Kirsty.
Thank you.